Thank you, and welcome to the 2024 Terasem Freedom Seder. It is March 10th, and I am Swami G here at the Space Coast Ashram for the Terasem Movement Trans Religion. We had the absolutely lovely opportunity to begin our quadrennial convocation this year by hosting a Freedom Seder live in person with a beautiful, lovely, large group of people here together, something that we've not done since prior to COVID, and certainly not in such a scale and in memory, perhaps not ever. Thank you for everyone who took part in the convocation and our opening dinner for the Terasem Freedom Seder. I am today going to record this and go through the Seder for um, in a recorded fashion. No large group here, but for those who are unable to attend and make it, I always like to retell this story for every year, so that we don't forget and that others will also learn and remember this vital history. Who is Terasem? Terasem is a collective consciousness dedicated to diversity, unity, and joyful immortality. Terasem is all of us gathered at this Seder table. Terasem means earth seed. We will grow throughout space and time. We will spread joy everywhere. What is a Freedom Seder? What is a Haggadah? Seder is the Hebrew word for order. A Seder is a ceremonial meal that occurs in a set order. Each part of the meal helps us to remember the awfulness of slavery and to appreciate the nature of freedom. It is especially important to share the Seder with children. The Freedom Seder is inspired by a 3,000-year-old Jewish ceremony to commemorate freedom from Egyptian slavery. The Freedom Seder expands on the Jewish tradition. More diverse aspects of freedom are contemplated. Haggadah is the Hebrew word for to tell. A Haggadah is a booklet that tells a story about freedom. The Terasem Haggadah tells a story of many freedoms. Where is the Freedom Seder celebrated? Seders are celebrated at homes or gathering places. Terasem centers are meant to host Freedom Seders. Friends and family are always invited. Any place with a Terasem Seder plate and Haggadah will do. Hold up your Seder plate and show all, as each symbol will be explained during the Seder. First Seder symbol is spring vegetables and salt water. Something like celery, parsley will do, and dip it in some salt water. Apples and honey are also present on the Seder plate. 4 pizzas of matzah with haroset, such as mashed nuts, apples, cinnamon, and juice, as well as a piece of paper money. These are the items that we will put together on a Seder plate. When is the Freedom Seder celebrated? Freedom Seders are celebrated by Terasem on March 10th of each year. Following a solar year calendar, we start at sundown with the lighting of 2 holiday candles. As we light the holiday candles, be thankful for our togetherness. Sing, chant, and be happy. The Jewish Seder, known as a Passover or Pesach, occurs based on the lunar calendar. Originally, Passover was a springtime holiday. To honor this memory, let us all now eat green vegetable dipped in salt water. The new growth vegetable symbolizes our hope that new freedom springs forth from this Seder. The salt water symbolizes our tears for those who lack even the freedom to celebrate this Seder. If you have it prepared at your location, now is an opportunity to dip that vegetable in the salt water, to take a bite, and to taste that bitter saltiness of tears. Why is the Terasem Haggadah opened upward? Well, since we're here virtually, we are flipping through the pages of a presentation, but our binded booklets would flip open, would flip upwards. This is perhaps an opportunity to engage that animation in our transitions so we can have the appearance that these pages flip upward, but to open our minds into the cosmos, to look up. There are billions of suns in our galaxy. There are billions of galaxies in our universe. To remind us that thinking upwing is a good alternative to traditional political thinking about freedom, which is usually left wing or right wing. To help make the Haggadah different and special, for thousands of years, the Seder meal has been people's favorite holiday. What is better to celebrate than freedom? How will this Seder proceed? Well, I'm glad you asked. A leader will ask participants to take turns in reading passages from the Haggadah. Some songs will be sung to respect the inspiration Terasem received from the Passover tradition. Ceremonial foods will be eaten, and a meal will be served during an intermission. We will end with a commitment to help ensure that next year, more people will be free. Next year in Terasem. How it all began. Over 3,000 years ago, a tribe of monotheists from Canaan called the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt. The Hebrews were originally welcomed to Egypt from Canaan as free men because they were related to Joseph, a high advisor to the ruler called a Pharaoh. Joseph was the great-grandson of the first monotheists, Abraham and Sarah. Joseph arrived in Egypt years earlier as a slave because he had been sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. He forgave them and helped them settle in Egypt when Canaan was afflicted by a drought. Egypt avoided the Canaanites' desperation because Joseph interpreted one of the Pharaoh's dreams to warn of the drought and to stockpile grain. Joseph's dream interpretation skills earned him his freedom and high position, which he used to ensure Egypt grew ever more wealth. After Joseph's death, the Egyptians enslaved all of the Hebrews. This shows that human memories can be quite short. One reason why we retell the freedom story every year. Filling our cups for the first time. Slaves in ancient Egypt were not even given a day off. The concept of a Sabbath arose from these slaves' freedom. Something good can often be made out of something bad. They also had very little food and water. In gratitude for our Sabbath, our health, our water, our love, and our instinct for justice, let us drink to life, which in Hebrew sounds like l'chaim. A freedom leaders start. The Hebrews grew so numerous, the Egyptians began to fear them. Pharaoh ordered firstborn Hebrew sons killed in a population control. A Hebrew baby, Moshe, was floated down the Nile in the hope he might be saved by an Egyptian family. The Pharaoh's daughter saw him floating and raised him as her own. Moses learned of his ancestry and empathized with the Hebrews. One day he lost his temper and killed a slave driver for whipping an old Hebrew man who was too weak to work further. Moses escaped to the desert and lived a good life as a shepherd. His conscience urged him to return to demand freedom for the Hebrew slaves. He bravely approached the mighty Pharaoh in the clothing of a simple shepherd. Moses' persistence. Ruben, would you like to read this page?
Yeah. Moses' persistence. The Pharaoh laughed at Moses and refused to heed his pleas. Why would the most powerful man in the world give up a huge economic benefit? Moses predicted many plagues would befall Egypt if it failed to free the slaves. Societies built on the rotten foundations of injustice invariably crumble down. The Pharaoh didn't believe Moses. The predicted plagues of illness and disease occurred. To emphasize with even the Egyptian sorrows, we diminish our caps for each of the modern plagues. Empathy with all sufferers. A full cup symbolizes full joy. Take one drop out for each of these 10 modern plagues. Thirst, homelessness, loneliness, poverty, illness, ignorance, bigotry, injustice, violence, starvation.
We fill our glasses for a second time. This time, we fill our glasses in gratitude for all those who made our freedoms possible. Give thanks for the gifts of billions of souls and share gladly, if you could do it on the screen, with others your lifeline. Even the suffering of our enemies needs to be respected. Their pain is our pain, for we are all part of the same Terasem consciousness. Most who suffer are innocent, thank you, victims of happenstance or manipulation. Let us all work toward the day when there is no pain and suffering for anyone. L'chaim, to drink, to life, drink up. Pharaoh relents. Eventually, Moses wore down the resistance of the Pharaoh, who ordered the Hebrews out of Egypt and into the empty desert. The Pharaoh's conscience, touched by Moses' communication, connected the disasters of Egypt to slavery. A lone protester got the most powerful man in the world to give up one of the pillars of his economy. This is remarkable, and we must never forget it. The Hebrews crossed the Red Sea during a rare low tide. Later, the Pharaoh changed his mind and tried to capture the Hebrews, but by then the Red Sea was back at high tide and the Hebrews were gone. This teaches us two lessons: that fortune favors the bold. We must make our own good luck. Two, you won't fail if you don't give up. Ruben, would you like to follow with the price of freedom?
The price of freedom. In the desert, the Hebrews lacked food. We each now eat some matzah to remind us of the cheap, fast flatbread they ate in the desert. The matzah also reminds us that freedom requires sacrifice and change. Matzah doesn't taste that good, but it was a necessary sacrifice and change for freedom. We have 4 matzahs on the Seder plate for the 4 epochs of sacrifice change that we'll discuss tonight. Slavery, self-responsibility, racism, integration, extinction, cosmic dispersion, and illness, joyful immortality. What sacrifices are entailed in breaking away from someone else taking care of you, not making decisions based on skin tone, living in space and or cyber-conscious, not accepting illness-determined lifespans.
Thank you, Ruben. Here is symbolic matzah, which I will eat to represent the lambness. Yvette, would you like to read this next page?
With each new freedom comes new responsibilities. Without Egyptian technology, the Hebrews didn't know where to go. Without organized society, the Hebrews had no laws to guide them. They wandered chaotically. Moses crafted 10 commandments to ethically and practically guide the newly freed Hebrew society. We each now dip an apple in honey to remind us that the sweetness of freedom depends upon organizing ourselves with just laws. Order is a necessary, although not sufficient, basis for progress. Sensible lawmaking is the responsibility of a free people. Cooperation is the responsibility of a diverse society. Geoethics is the responsibility of a technologically advanced society.
Thank you. Every Seder asks 4 questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? Why on this night do we fill our glasses 4 times? Why on this night do we dip our food twice? Why on this night do we eat as comfortably as we can? This is a night we devote to celebrating freedom and remembering slavery. We fill our glasses 4 times to give thanks for a day of no work, the Sabbath, which slaves never had, to all those who made our freedom possible, the miracles of communications which makes global consciousness possible, the possibility of an infinite future of joy and happiness. We dip twice to balance the sweetness of freedom with the sadness of slavery. We are at our most relaxed as a sign of our utmost freedom. Welcoming Elijah. We now fill a glass in the center of the table and leave it untouched. It is Elijah's cup. Jewish legend tells of a time when a prophet will come to usher in freedom and justice for all. If he just sips from the cup, the time is not right. If the cup is emptied, the time has come. Within Terasem, we believe we must take self-responsibility for freedom and justice. To evidence our belief, we now open the front door to welcome Elijah as a symbol of our own readiness to take personal responsibility for positive change. Strangers that appear are also welcome to respectfully join our Seder. Sing together, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Thanks. And Ruben, would you like to take this next slide?
Slavery and the fight for freedom continue. The freedom of the Hebrews didn't end slavery for other peoples, but the idea of freedom was one enshrined in the Bible. The idea of freedom inspires us to this day as a meme or shared thought concept. Until very recently, slavery was an accepted part of human society. When the United States was formed, most people in the world were in some form of slavery, more or less strict. Even today, slavery persists in some places and its bad effects, like racism, exist everywhere. Slavery and the fight for freedom continue. For hundreds of years, millions of Africans were trapped in a particularly vicious form of slavery. European merchants traded alcohol, guns, and other manufactured goods to African traders for African slaves. The European merchants, through their contracted ship captains, then sold the slaves to North and South American planters and purchased agricultural products grown by the slave from them. Back in Europe, the agricultural products were sold at high profit to be refined into other products. Sugar first came to Europe this way, and most Europeans became addicted to it. Sugar was also distilled into rum.
Huge fortunes were made off of African-American slavery. Caribbean planters were the technology entrepreneurs of their day. Slave ship captains were admired. Yet those who made the money found they had brutalized their own souls. They lived in constant fear. Many of them died awful deaths from vengeful slaves and diseases. Their legacy poisons relationships among their descendants 400 years after the slave trade began. African-American slavery teaches us that no amount of money is worth the degradation of the human spirit. The paper money on the Seder plate symbolizes this lesson. As you pass it around, tear it in two, which we'll do symbolically here. Yvette, would you like to read this next slide?
Remembering African American slavery. We must remember the horrors of African American slavery, or else our ancestors will have died a second time. Their beingness or beings lives on in our recounting their story. Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. On slave ships, women were routinely raped. Slaves were made to lay like sardines in their own excrement for days on end. Meanwhile, the small ships rocked in the rough waters. The air below the deck was suffocating. Slave ships were true man-made hells.
Inconceivable horrors. The cruelty inflicted upon the African slaves was unprecedented. Slaves were dehumanized to minimize moral qualms. Slaves were terrorized to facilitate their control. About one slave ship a day left European ports for Africa and the Americas for well over 100 years. The ships rarely left Africa without a chock-full load of slaves. Rarely did any of the slaves on board know each other. Most didn't even speak the same language, as they came from throughout a large part of Africa. Even being on the ocean, which most had never seen, must have been terribly frightening. Treasure our freedom for what our ancestors suffered. Conditions were so bad in the West Indies and Brazil that the slave population couldn't maintain its size without new slave purchases. Newly purchased slaves were branded like animals with their owner's trademark or initial. Some planters just killed any old or infirm slaves to operate more efficiently, which sounds familiar in this story, doesn't it? In the United States, families were torn apart to meet their demand for slaves on distant plantations. Slaveholders disregarded the anguish of a mother being separated from her children. Slaves shrieked with fear at never seeing their loved ones again. Ruben, would you like to take this slide?
The first nail in slavery's coffin came from Clarkson. From age 26, Clarkson led efforts to get England to ban the global slave trade. His 16-hour-a-day campaigning against slavery would take him by horseback on a 35,000-mile odyssey. From waterfront pubs to an audience with an emperor, from the decks of Navy ships to parliamentary hearing rooms. More than once people would threaten to kill him, and on a Liverpool pier in the midst of a storm, a group of slave ship officers would nearly succeed. His effort, wrote Alexis de Tocqueville, was absolutely without precedent. If you pore over the histories of all peoples, I doubt that you will find anything more extraordinary. What made Clarkson, sorry.
You can keep going.
What made Clarkson grassroots effort so amazing? At the end of the 18th century, well over 3/4 of all people alive were in bondage of one kind or another, not the captivity of stripped prison uniforms, but of various systems of slavery or serfdom. The age was a high point in the trade in which close to 80,000 chained and shackled Africans were loaded onto slave ships each year. In parts of the Americas, slaves far outnumbered free persons. The same was true in parts of Africa. And it was from these slaves that African chiefs and slave dealers drew most of the men and women they sold. In India and other parts of Asia, tens of billions of farm workers were in outright slavery, and others were peasants in debt bondage as harsh as any slave was bound to a plantation. In Russia, the majority of the population were serfs, often bought, sold, whipped, or sent to the army at the will of their owners.
Yvette, would you like to take this next section?
No evil is too entrenched to be changed by determination. The world of bondage seemed all. The more normal then became anyone's looking back in time would have seen little but other slave systems. The sacred text of most major religions took slavery for granted. Slavery had existed before money or written law. So rapidly were slaves worked to death. Above all, on the brutal sugar plantations of the Caribbean, that between 1660 and 1807, ships brought well over 3 times as many Africans across the oceans as they did Europeans. The Atlantic was a conveyor belt to early death in the fields of immense swath of plantations that stretched from Baltimore to Rio de Janeiro and beyond. Looking back today, what is even more astonishing than the pervasiveness of slavery in the late 1700s is how swiftly it died. By the end of the following century, slavery was, at least on paper, outlawed. Almost everywhere, the anti-slavery movement had achieved its goal in little more than one lifetime. To celebrate this achievement, let us eat matzah a second time. But now, loaded high with harasat to symbolize the fruit of our ancestors, determination to replace oppression with freedom. Victory over slavery tastes sweet. Sure is.
Olaudah Equiano was essential to the birth and growth of the anti-slavery movement. Olaudah was captured in Africa as a child and raised in the Caribbean as a slave. He managed to save enough money to buy his freedom twice and retired to England to write the first best-selling book against slavery. On the most trifling occasions, slaves are loaded with chains. The iron muzzle and thumb screws are applied for the slightest faults. I've seen a Negro beaten till some of his bones were broken for only letting a pot boil over. When the slave master chose to punish the slave women, they make the husbands flog their own wives. Is it surprising that usage like this should make them seek a refuge in death from those evils which render their lives intolerable? Olaudah used logic to turn the British public against the slave trade. I will not suppose that the dealers in slaves are born worse than other men. No, it is a fatality of this mistaken avarice that it corrupts the milk of human kindness and turns it into gall. And had the pursuits of those men been different, they might have been as generous, as tender-hearted and just as they are unfeeling, rapacious, and cruel. Surely this traffic cannot be good, which spreads like a pestilence and taints what it touches. When you make men slaves, you deprive them of half their virtue. You set them in your own conduct, an example of fraud, rapine, and cruelty, and compel them to live with you in a state of war. Olaudah died a wealthy man, leaving an estate worth $100,000, all earned from multiple editions of his self-published book. He also invented the book tour. Persistent informed communicators overturned the age-old, all-powerful slavery system. Slaves have rebelled throughout history, but the campaign in England was the first time a large number of people became outraged and stayed outraged for years over someone else's rights. For 50 years, activists in England worked to end slavery in the British Empire, and their success meant a huge loss to the imperial economy. The abolitionists succeeded because they mastered one challenge that still faces anyone who cares about justice. Drawing connections between the near and the distant, the abolitionists' first job was to make Britons understand what lay behind the sugar they ate, the tobacco they smoked, the coffee they drank. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Quote by Margaret Mead. We now fill our glasses a third time. This time, we drink in honor of modern communication technology. Books, discs, films, phones, computers, sats. These technologies are paving the way for Terasem by linking our consciousness together. Olaudah was able to get inside the consciousness of entire populations through the power of his book. Mass communications was an essential tool in eradicating first the slave trade, then slavery itself, and most recently, legal racism. We must now employ telecom strategies to battle covert racism and other forms of oppression. Raise your glasses and drink to a life of connected minds. L'chaim. Ruben.
Frederick Douglass did to slavery what Olaudah and Clarkson did to the slave trade. Douglass, born a slave, self-educated himself, started a newspaper and became America's leading voice for freedom, an abolitionist. He used poignant examples of hypocrisy to persuade millions of the need for ending slavery. The mass of professed Christians in America strained at a gnat and swallowed a camel. They would be shocked at the proposition of fellowshipping a sheep stealer, and at the same time, they hewed to their communion a man stealer. They profess to love God whom they have not seen, whilst they hate their brother whom they have seen. They pay money to put Bibles on the other side of the globe, while they despise and totally neglect the men who build their own country.
You bet.
Even as radical slavery ended, the enslavement of women continued. Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then that little man in black there, he says women can't have as much right as men. Because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down, all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. Now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. Cleveland, Ohio, 1851.
That's such a great piece. All right. Well, traditionally, this would be the time where we pause or an intermission to enjoy the meal. However, we are going to continue on with the Seder in this virtual recording and gathering. But for those who are participating throughout time and using this recording as a guide for them, you can feel free to pause the recording for bio break and a meal, and then come back on. So enjoy the meal. On the Terasem Day of Freedom, we look forward to the day when nanotechnology will enable us to create any food we want simply through intelligent, automated assembly of atoms. And that looks like a beautiful view and a beautiful meal in space there. And we will continue with the conclusion of the Seder. During the first part of the Seder, we gave thanks for freedom's greatest past victory, our freedom from slavery. Now we give thought to our next victories, freedom from many other kinds of oppression. Each freedom earned provides a platform for achieving yet greater freedom. Each responsibility achieved gives us the capability to exercise yet greater responsibilities. Ultimately, we can be free of random forces of chaos only by taking responsibility for the very universe. This is the path of Terasem. Who among us will be like Moses and demand freedom from thirst, homelessness, and hunger? Who among us will be like Clarkson and get others to feel the pain of illness, poverty? Who among us will be like Douglas and demand an end to loneliness, ignorance, and violence? Who among us will be like Sojourner Truth and help free us from bigotry and injustice? We must always remember the freedoms we enjoy today were considered by almost everyone to be impossible to achieve, and millions died and continue to die due to that failure of belief. The Native American genocide, centuries of African American slave deaths and tortured souls, 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, millions in African ethnic cleansing, millions in Asian political killings, 200,000 a day to treatable illness. The greatest part of our freedoms were achieved by persistent, persuasive communications. Freedoms were won quickly compared to how long we were oppressed. The spark of freedom is always to dream. It can be achieved. Let's take a minute of meditation to remember the millions of stolen lives. In this final section, why don't we each take a page here? I'll begin with the first page. Maybe Ruben take the second, Yvette take the third, and we'll go from there. I have a dream. We've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all people would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation.
So we have come to cash this check, a check that will give up upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to rise from the desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. I say to you today, my friends, that in spite of the difficulties and frustrations of the moment, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
The march for freedom must continue. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. If America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of the New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous peaks of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. When we let freedom ring, we will let it ring from every state, every city. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, people of every color, hue, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Lovely. It's such a powerful, moving, speech, still resonates so true. And having now recited it annually for 42 my 42nd year, it's still beautiful to hear. Well, this as we are coming towards the end, this traditional song, a psalm, I understand, where Israel was in Egypt land, adopted to include the modern refrain as well with civil rights. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, way down in Egypt land. Tell, oh, Pharaoh, let my people go. When the African slave trade began, let my people be. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people be. Go down, way down and rage all clans below. Jim Crow, let my people be. Thus saith the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your people dead. Let my people go. Go down, way down in Egypt land. Tell, oh, Pharaoh, let my people go. I have a dream, bold Martin said, let my people be. If not, your greatness will be dead. Let my people be. Go down, way down in racist lands. Tell, oh, Jim Crow, let my people be. As Israel stood by the waterside, let my people go. By God's command, it did divide. Let my people go. Go down, way down in Egypt land. Tell, oh, Pharaoh, let my people go. As millions march side by side, let my people be. By civil rights, they must abide. Let my people be. Go down, way down in racist lands. Tell, oh, Jim Crow, let my people be. Be free. All right. Ruben, can you take this next one?
Can you dream that one day people will wake up to the existential dangers of living on Earth and will develop defenses, including to start moving off the planet? One day, geoethical nanotechnology provides everyone with enough food, water, shelter, and opportunity to pursue their interests. One day, personal cyber consciousness and bio-nanotechnology lets everyone achieve true security from illness and catastrophe. One day, the right to life and to a good life is accorded to whatever values that right, regardless of their skin tone, species, or substrate.
Mm-hmm. Well, we fill our glasses for the fourth time. And doggy bowls. Next year in Terasem, Theodore Herzl wrote, if you will it, it is no dream. He was referring to the recreation of Israel 2,000 years after its dismemberment. He was right. The traditional Passover Seder ended with the pledge next year in Jerusalem, Israel's capital. It was a shorthand way of saying next year we may be free to celebrate in the land where we first lived as free people. Today we can say next year in Terasem. It is another way of saying next year may we be closer to the ultimate collective consciousness that will give diversity, unity, and joyful immortality. Everyone, please raise your glass for the fourth time and join with me. Just as freedom from slavery was achieved, so will our other dreams be achieved. Let us work to do away with all forms of oppression. Let us rejoice next year in Terasem. To life, l'chaim. Dayenu, Hebrew word of saying, for this alone, we should be grateful. Ilu hotzi anu mi mitzrayim dayenu. Dayenu, dayenu, dayenu. Inu natan lanu eta Shabbat dayenu, dayenu, dayenu. Ilu natan lanu eta Torah dayenu, dayenu. Dayenu, dayenu. Ilu natan lanu eta it dayenu. Dayenu. Thank you for joining us. That brings us to the conclusion of the Freedom Seder. I appreciate everyone's participation and, helping to tell, to retell, to share, and to observe this beautiful story, which is our exodus from slavery into the state, the being of freedom. And that is our conclusion. So I really appreciate again once everyone for being a part of Terasem, and look forward to seeing you next year in Terasem.
Gabriel?
Quite
Yes.
lovely, Gabe.
Thank you, Yvette, Ruben. Thank you both for being here and participating.
Yeah. I'm glad I stayed and I didn't, that was great.
Hello, Yvette. So many
Hi, Ruben.
So much time. Gabriel, in the chat, I put 2 times the Seder in Spanish, but the second one is the right one because it's the revised and corrected
Yes.
version. I send it to you also by email. I don't remember if in the mail or in the WhatsApp. I did a comment about some phrases that I want your opinion. Then you tell me. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, I did see it here. I saw it there as well. Haven't reviewed it yet, but we'll get there. And thank you, Ruben, for continuing to help us, produce this content in more languages, make it more available. It's lovely. And Yvette, we were sorry to miss you. We had the quadrennial convocation just last week, and I took that opportunity to do an in-person Seder at the beginning, February 29th, through March 4th. Hey, Sabine. And it was lovely. We had just a good group out here. Maybe you've seen some of the photos.
Wow,
yeah.
nice.
Yeah, we had 3 tables. I think we had
Beautiful
18 attendees. And so it was just a good diverse group. Many people who had been to Seders, but not a Seder like this. Many people who had never been to a Seder. It was their first Seder. And to do that at the end of African American History Month, at the beginning of the convocation as our opening dinner. And it was a great
beautiful.
So I scaled down, the recording this time because, we had done that, didn't do on the full on meal and everything. But again, it is every time to every group. It's a beautiful. Sabine, want to come say hi? Guess not.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I miss being with you. The last couple of months I've been dealing with vertigo.
Oh,
Yeah, I've had two bouts already, so I'm trying to get to the bottom of that, and it's just kind of thrown me off balance, no pun intended.
yeah.
So I'm just, kind of making my recovery through that. But it's good to see you. It's good to be here, and see you next month on the 10th.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. And
I'll come to the next meeting. I'll try. Tuesdays and Thursdays are bad for me, but I'm going to try to make it. I'm going to make another commitment to come back.
yeah, yeah. And you're always welcome to, watch the recordings. I don't know if that's been something
Okay.
you've gotten to. Many people the meetings were never, the gathering was never convenient. I get that because I've had conflicts, including a day job where just
Yeah.
making 10 a.m. It just, I mean, even if you're not on East Coast time, it doesn't
I'm
necessarily.
there in spirit.
Yeah.
I always remember the 10th day at 10 a.m., the 10th day of the month. So I'm always there in spirit.
Excellent. It's great. And yeah, and we feel it. And it's been great.
Yeah.
The the growth of the community, the acceptance of ideas and awareness of these questions is everyone's up to it, and
Good.
super excited for what this next year has to come. Love Machina, the re-release of To Be the movie. We completed the first round of the Trues
Nice.
in art, and we have more and other new projects to take on. So much to do, so much to engage with, and we're just happy to see everyone's faces when they
Love
come.
it.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have a great weekend, and see you next Monday on the 10th, or next month on the 10th.
Yep. Yep.
7 a.m. my time.
Absolutely. And so one of the announcements, once I finish the illustrations, I'll send out a new copy of the Truths to
Okay.
everybody. But another announcement is that Ruben has established an ashram, two ashrams in Argentina.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to making a trip, and I'm sure he'd be happy to have you visit that
Wow.
ashram in
Beautiful.
Argentina as well. So much growth here.
Yes. Love it.
And one of the ashram, the second one, because the first one was far away from the airport of Buenos Aires, more than 1,000 miles. But the second one is in Buenos Aires, so it's less
Okay.
than 1 hour from the airport. So
Beautiful.
you are welcome anytime you want to
Thank
visit
you.
and stay there.
Lovely.
All right.
All right.
Ciao.
Peace out.
Bye.